researchers are grinding away once more. This time, they are making new infections and microorganisms in their research centers. Researchers ordinarily favor modifying effectively existing or wiped out microscopic organisms and infections to deliver new strains that will overcome our resistance, antibodies, and drugs. Sometimes, they incline toward making new infections and microbes without any preparation. Be that as it may, these strains are not constantly perilous to people despite the fact that they could be fatal to creatures like mice and even to other microscopic organisms. Horsebox. Researchers at the University of Alberta have made Horsebox, a deadly infection firmly identified with the similarly dangerous smallpox. In contrast to smallpox, Horsebox doesn't influence people and is just deadly to horses. The researchers made the infection during a 6-month study supported by pharmaceutical organization PhiX. The analysts bought DNA pieces by means of mail request and masterminded them to shape the infection. The whole undertaking was not costly. The DNA pieces used to make the infection cost just $100,000. The study caused a problem at the time it was uncovered. Different researchers were worried that legislatures or even fear-based oppressors could utilize the information to make smallpox infection for natural weapons. A smallpox pandemic could turn out to be savage for us today. We no longer get inoculated for it, since we annihilated the infection in 1980. The scientists explained that they made the infection since they needed to create improved smallpox antibodies. PhiX later uncovered that it had delivered a smallpox antibody with the Horsebox virus. Other researchers state that the specialists could have separated Horsebox from wild pony populaces as opposed to making it without any preparation. PhiX said they would have done quite recently that in the event that they had realized they had characteristic access to the virus. However, lead specialist David Evans said they reproduced the infection in light of the fact that PhiX would have been not able to market the Horsebox infection taken from nature. Dark Death. Somewhere in the range of 1347 and 1351, a large number of Europeans were distressed with a puzzling ailment that slaughtered more than 50 million individuals. Today, we realize this sickness is the Black Death, which is brought about by the Yersinia pestis microbes. In spite of the fact that the Black Death is still near, it isn't as powerful as it used to be. Not many years back, analysts from a few schools, including the University of Tübingen in Germany and McMaster University in Canada, reproduced the fatal microscopic organisms from DNA tests separated from the teeth of a casualty who kicked the bucket during the plague. They got just 30 milligrams of the microscopic organisms from the teeth, yet that was sufficient to reproduce it. As an outcome, analysts affirmed the first microorganism's relationship to the Black Death around today. A few researchers had asserted that the microorganisms were of various strains, however they are presently affirmed to be the equivalent. The one we have around today just turned out to be less destructive after it changed. Polio. Like their partners at the University of Alberta, researchers at the State University of New York have made a savage fake infection by purchasing DNA pieces by means of mail request. This time, it is polio, and it is as strong as the common one. Mice presented to the counterfeit polio became ill similarly as they would have whenever presented to normal polio. The research facility made polio was questionable among researchers. The analysts who delivered it had taken its code from databases accessible to nearly anyone. Different specialists dread that individuals with ulterior intentions could build up their own counterfeit polio, which is a lot simpler to make than different risky infections like smallpox. Smallpox's hereditary code is 185,000 letters in length, while polio's is only 7,741 letters in length. Despite the fact that we are as of now at the very edge of annihilating polio, researchers dread that we will even now should be immunized against the infection since it could be reproduced. Mousebox. A couple of years back, analysts at the Australian National University and the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation (CSIRO) delivered a fatal transformed strain of Mousebox unintentionally. Mousebox is another deadly infection that has a place with a similar family as Horsebox and smallpox. The specialists were attempting to create anti-conception medication for mice at the time that they erroneously made the infection. They embedded a quality that advanced the production of interleukin-4, IL-4, into Mousebox, which they infused into certain mice. The mice were immunized and shouldn't be hurt by the Mousebox. Instead of making the mice barren as analysts had expected, the debilitated infection turned deadly and obliterated the insusceptible frameworks of the mice, killing them in 9 days. The new Mousebox was perilous to the point that it was impervious to immunization. Half of the other inoculated mice presented to the changed Mousebox additionally died. The analysts were so frightened by their creation that they would not like to distribute their discoveries. They even met with the Australian military to affirm in the event that it was protected to distribute. Researchers dread that human smallpox could likewise change and become deadlier whenever infused with IL-4. In any case, they are uncertain in light of the fact that nobody has attempted it yet. We know it won't be long until some researcher does. SARS 2.0. Serious intense respiratory disorder, SARS, is a deadly infection. In excess of 700 individuals were executed during a SARS plague that contaminated 8,000 individuals in 29 nations somewhere in the range of 2002 and 2003. Presently, researchers have made it deadlier. The new freak SARS infection was made by a gathering of analysts drove by Dr. Ralph Barrick of the University of North Carolina. They call it SARS 2.0. The specialists built up the infection by adding some protein to the normally happening SARS. SARS 2.0 is safe to immunizations and medicines used to fix the normally happening SARS infection. The group said that the examination was vital in light of the fact that the common SARS infection could transform and get insusceptible to our immunizations. By making a deadlier and transformed infection, we could create more grounded immunizations that will spare us from an increasingly deadly SARS scourge, that is, if the normal SARS ever mutates. However, different researchers are concerned in light of the fact that the SARS 2.0 that should spare us from a dangerous SARS plague could begin that pestilence in the event that it ever escapes from the lab. MERS-rabies virus hybrid. Researchers have made a MERS-rabies crossbreed infection. The thought is to utilize the infection to build up an immunization that will shield us from both infections. Rabies is a destructive sickness that can be transmitted to people through the nibbles of tainted canines that typically have the infection in their saliva. Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, is another infection that showed up in Saudi Arabia a couple of years back. It is firmly identified with SARS and is spread from bats to camels and, at long last, to people. MERS contaminated 1,800 individuals at the hour of its first pestilence and killed more than 630. Its casualty rate is around 35%. As we referenced in the past passage, SARS contaminated more than 8,000 individuals during a 2003 plague, however executed a little more than 700. Despite the fact that SARS caused more passings in supreme terms, it has a lower casualty rate than MERS. Just around 10% of SARS casualties kicked the bucket. Furthermore, for the present, we don't have any antibody for MERS. To make the MERS-rabies crossover, scientists took a few proteins from the MERS infection and added it to rabies. They utilized the new infection to build up another antibody that made mice impervious to rabies and MERS. They accept that the antibody can likewise be utilized for people and camels in danger of getting MERS. PhiX 174. PhiX 174 is another fake infection we have delivered in research facilities. It was made by scientists at the Institute of Biological Energy Alternatives in Rockville, Maryland. The scientists displayed the counterfeit infection after the regular PhiX infection. PhiX is a bacteriophage, a classification of infections that taint and eliminate microscopic organisms. In any case, it has no impact on people. The scientists made the counterfeit infection in 14 days, yet it takes after the normal infection, so much that it is difficult to reveal to them separated. The specialists trust that the new infection is the initial phase in creating freaking counterfeit microscopic organisms that can be utilized to serve man. Anonymous virus. Analysts from University College London and the National Physical Laboratory have made an anonymous infection that eliminates microscopic organisms and acts like a genuine infection. Like PhiX 174, it is a bacteriophage, however deadlier. The anonymous infection assaults any microscopic organisms around it. In practically no time, it breaks into littler parts that join and make gaps on the assortments of the microscopic organisms. The openings immediately become bigger, compelling the microorganisms to release their substance. The microorganisms kick the bucket soon after. Despite its unnerving power, the anonymous infection isn't hazardous to people and didn't assault human cells during tests. Be that as it may, it could enter human cells simply like normal infections. Analysts trust the outcomes will be utilized to treat and study bacterial ailments in people. The infection could likewise be utilized to modify the human quality. Phall Flu. Some Dutch researchers have made a freak and deadlier adaptation of the effectively deadly winged creature influenza. Normal fledgling influenza isn't effectively transmitted among people. Be that as it may, the analysts changed it with the goal that it could be. To test their new infection, the specialists presented a few ferrets to it. Ferrets were picked in light of the fact that they had comparable winged animal influenza side effects to humans. Ages later, the effectively changed infection transformed again and got airborne. Normal winged animal influenza isn't an airborne ailment. The examination was disputable in the Science Network. It turned out to be considerably more so when the Dutch scientists endeavored to distribute the procedure to make the destructive infection. Despite the fact that researchers dread that psychological militants could utilize the investigation to deliver a fatal natural weapon that could not execute a large portion of the individuals on the planet, the analysts included state that the examination was important to permit us get ready for a changed fledgling influenza pestilence. H1N1 virus. In 1918, the world saw the appearance of a dangerous influenza scourge. This was the H1N1 infection. When it was finished, up to 100 million individuals were dead. This season's flu virus made blood saturate the lungs of casualties. They discharged blood from their noses and mouths before suffocating in the blood inside their lungs. The influenza returned in 2009. Be that as it may, it was less deadly despite the fact that it was transformed and deadlier than it ought to have been. Researcher Yoshihiro Kawaoka took tests of the changed strain that made the 2009 plague and utilized it to make a deadlier strain that was impervious to antibodies. This strain was like the one that caused the 1918 scourge. Kawaoka was not intending to deliver an increasingly deadly form of this season's flu virus at that point. He just needed to make the first form of this season's flu virus with the goal that he could concentrate how it changed and had the option to sidestep our insusceptibility. The fatal infection is put away in a lab and could get deadly if at any time discharged.